Let me know when you are ready, and I'll restart the clock.
Yeah, I'm ready whenever.
You ready? Okay, I'm going to start it now. I'll give you 6:45, and go ahead, brother.
All right. I believe that the subject matter of the debate is whether or not January 6th is an insurrection or would be considered an insurrection. Originally, I thought there was going to be a 1v1 debate against me and Andrew, but I can do a 1v2 debate against my 2021 less educated self as well. I have no problem speaking to arguments I've made in prior clips. I have no problem speaking to current arguments made by Andrew. So we can head down that road. I think that the first thing that we need to acknowledge when we talk about the structure of the United States government is that the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is what powers our three branches of government, and it sits above every other part of our government, and every part of our government must comport to the Constitution. I think this is a foundational American belief and principle, and if you don't share on this foundational belief, then we're never going to connect in any sort of meaningful way when we talk about how U.S. law or U.S. process or procedure or whatever should be carried out. So that being said, there was an amendment to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and Section 3 of that amendment basically goes on to say that any prior oath taker that has engaged in or aided in an insurrection is no longer allowed to hold office, essentially. Now, the question that we come to today is trying to define what is an insurrection. And while in modern times, it seems like an insurrection is a term left to a dictionary or a term left to internet debaters, at the time that the amendment, the 14th Amendment, was framed, what was an insurrection was pretty well understood. An insurrection includes four vital elements. One is an assemblage, meaning a group of people that have come together. Two is resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Three is you have to do this by way of force or intimidation. And four is it has to be through for a public concern or a public cause, not a private thing that one might be interested in. Just for some understandings of when we say an assemblage, we can look to in 1861, Justice Benjamin Curtis said a combination or conspiracy by which different individuals are united in one common purpose. So not just a bunch of people in a city protesting different things, but a group of people that are united in one common purpose. We can look to Justice Samuel Chase in the case of Freeze in the year 1800. He says if a body of people conspire and meditate an insurrection to resist or oppose the execution of any statute of the United States, a statute such as the ECA, the Electoral Count Act, which is what they were united on January 6th to insurrect against. They were opposing the execution of that. They are only guilty of a high misdemeanor, but if they proceed to carry such intention into execution by force, which we did see on the day of January 6th, regardless of if every member engaged in force or just one, they are guilty of the treason of levying war, and the quantum of force employed neither lessens nor increases the crime, whether by 100 or 1,000 persons is wholly immaterial. Doesn't matter if you have an insurrection of 50 people, 100 people, or 1,000 people. You only really need two people there to make it an insurrection. In terms of whether or not they were resisting a law or interfering with the cause of government, we can quote here, an insurrection against the United States requires resistance to any statute or some public law of the United States. This is a quote by Judge in, I think, 1826. Curtis spoke this to a jury. He says, the law does not distinguish between a purpose to prevent the execution of one or several or all laws. An insurrection could be directed at a legislature as well as at executive officials. William Rawle declared that an effort to coerce repeal of a general law to be an overt act of levying war. And Justice Field's opinion in the Great House Court case held that any effort to coerce the conduct of government constituted an insurrection, such as when people went to the White House, or I'm sorry, went to the Capitol to coerce Pence to overthrow the election, which is what Donald Trump told them to do. By force or by intimidation, quoting Justice Marshall in 1807, the most comprehensive definition of levying war against the king or against the United States, which I have seen, requires an assemblage of men ready to act and with an intent to do some treasonable act and armed in warlike manner, or else assembled in such numbers as to supersede the necessity of arms. You don't necessarily need weapons to do it. You could just have the numbers of people there threatening to use force or intimidation. And then for a public purpose, obviously, the insurrection is to, I'm quoting Judge John Kane here, insurrections to redress by force national grievances or to reform real or imaginary evils of a public nature. Obviously, they were protesting the vote. That's what they were there to do. This is obviously a public issue. So to recount, For the assembly, there were hundreds of people that breached the Capitol building. There were thousands that trespassed on federal land. For two, there was a clear resistance to the federal law. The trespassers were there to contravene the Electoral Count Act. There was a plethora of evidence brought up in the Anderson versus Griswold case about this, where, quoting the justices, quoting the judges on that case, they said substantial evidence in the record showed that the mob's unified purpose was to hinder or prevent Congress from counting the electoral votes as required by the 12th Amendment and from certifying the 2020 presidential election. The third element, the resistance made extensive use of force. This is self-evident just by watching any of the videos. To quote the Colorado Supreme Court again, the mob repeatedly and violently assaulted police officers who were trying to defend the Capitol. Obviously, there were calls to hang Mike Pence, and people marched very famously with 1776 signs, which, as many in this audience might be familiar with, was a very popular insurrection in U.S. history, or a rebellion even, one might say. And then for a public purpose, it was obviously for the public purpose of resisting what they perceived to be as the stealing of the election. There are ways to try to counter this argument. We can either use nonsense definitions of insurrection, but that doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters was the public understanding and the legal understanding of insurrection at the time the 14th Amendment was created and when Section 3 was framed, because that's what the Constitution demands, that we look at what was thought of as an insurrection when the language was added to the Constitution. We can try to divert by talking about BLM or anything else, and I'm happy to dive into all of those examples if we are going to concede on the original argument that January 6th satisfies all four elements of what I consider an insurrection to be. If we want to concede that and move on to analyzing any particular BLM action or whatever, that's totally fine. We can talk about the likeliness to work, of which an insurrection has never been defined as. An insurrection doesn't necessarily have to lead to the overthrow of the government. That would be understood as a rebellion. Every insurrection is not a rebellion, though every rebellion starts as an insurrection. And then when we say, this is a common one as well, why was no one charged with an insurrection? People can be charged or couldn't be charged with crimes for a variety of reasons, but for purposes of the 14th Amendment, nothing in there requires the criminal conviction of the crime of insurrection, only that an insurrection occurred and that one engaged in it or aided it.
All right. And that is 6:40. Okay. So just 5 seconds shy. That completes the opening statements. Really good arguments from both sides here. We'll go into round one. I'll turn it back. So we just completed opening statements, guys. Each party had 6 minutes and 45 seconds to make their original stance and their first opening statements. We'll go to round one. I'll set the clock for 3 minutes. Andrew, let me know when you are ready, and I will start.
I'm ready.
Okay, timer is going now. Go ahead, 3 minutes.
Yeah, so let's start with this idea of my definition. What the hell do I care about your definition? Nobody has been prosecuted for any insurrection by any definition. Destiny comes through and he gives us this list. He says, 1, an assemblage. Okay. 2, resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Okay. 3, by force or intimidation. Okay. 4, for a public purpose. He has just outlined basically almost every single political riot I've ever heard of. That is what that is outlined. So let's see, an assemblage. This would cover a riot. A bunch of people assembling. Resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. That could be shutting down roadways for commerce. That could mean anything. By force or intimidating, if you have Black Lives Matter, other groups like this who are out there saying no justice, no peace, that would be very intimidating. And then for public purpose, very nebulous. All of this is completely nebulous language. He has not actually given us a definition at all. By the way, if you could cam me while I'm talking, I'd appreciate it. He has not given us a definition at all. He's just kind of given us this loose, nebulous framework for what is or isn't an insurrection. So let's kind of dive into a couple more things here. He says people can or can't be charged for a variety of reasons. That's not saying anything. So what? Yeah, that's true. Maybe they committed insurrection and they weren't charged for insurrection, but also maybe they did not commit insurrection and that's why they weren't charged with insurrection. That's a non-argument. He says that these elements, third element, self-evident, Colorado Supreme Court using 1776 signs. People use 1776 signs all the time and have absolutely no interest in any type of rebellion whatsoever. It's very common for people to have those as bumper stickers. That doesn't mean that they're going to be engaging in any kind of rebellion or insurrection at all. He also, as he talks about these various rulings, he says treason of levying war comes in. Obviously, insurrection seems to have something to do with levying war against the United States, or at least some type of start to levy war against the United States. He still has not actually demonstrated any of this. He's just given us this really nebulous idea. An assemblage resisting any law or interfering with a course of
30
government
seconds.
proceeding by force or intimidating for public. This is very nebulous. So unless Destiny is going to concede that anything which meets this criteria is an insurrection, then I'm not even sure how to go forward with this debate. How in the world can he say essentially almost any riot on planet Earth or any
10
assemblage,
seconds.
even a peaceful protest where they shut down the roads, is an insurrection? That can't be true. That just can't be true.
Okay.
Shots fired.
We had ended there at about 2:57. Andrew, you're up on our channel. They can see you. I don't know if it's on your.
Yeah, we're good on mine too.
Okay, you are. Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that we're there. So, but you are definitely up on, and whoever's speaking, I always make them the main person. So, Destiny, I'm gonna put this is round one. I'm gonna put 3 minutes on the clock for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, brother.
So I think my definition is pretty clear. There's an assemblage. There's a clear resistance to the implementation or the execution of some federal law. The resistance has an aim to make use of force or intimidation, and it's gathered for a particular public purpose. BLM almost automatically fails on the fact that these were not usually demonstrations against federal law. I don't know the federal law or the federal thing that was being resisted by BLM. But again, I'm happy to dive into any particular BLM supposed insurrection or riot if you'd like. But again, I mean, that has nothing to do with January 6th. And if you want, then you can see that entire argument and we can move on to analyzing individual BLM instances. But again, you'd have to show that there was some implementation or carrying out of some federal function for it to be an insurrection against the United States government. States might have their own definitions of state insurrections. I'm unaware of any. So to say again, my definition of insurrection, like very clearly, has 4 elements. If you want to suggest an alternate definition that you feel more accurately comports with what you would consider an insurrection to be, that's fine. But we can't just say that it's nebulous and there is no definition when we have we've got references made in our Constitution and in our federal criminal code to insurrection. That doesn't make any sense. We can complain about people being charged with an insurrection or not, but whether or not somebody is charged with an insurrection, again, has nothing to do with the event itself. For instance, if I were to look and see at any number of BLM riots, if I were to look at a riot, would a challenge to that riot be, well, was anybody charged with rioting? If I could show you a riot where people clearly engaged in a riot, where there was a mass of people that were engaged in violent behavior that involved the destruction of some property or violent activity, but I were to say, well, look, nobody was actually charged with rioting, would you say then that, well, I guess nobody was actually, or there wasn't a riot that actually happened? Nobody would make that claim. There's a whole list of reasons why a prosecutor may or may not charge for particular crimes. In this particular case, there were really good reasons not to head down that insurrection charge road, because it would probably put the Supreme Court in a very hairy area, which they might end up getting into anyway, in terms of actually having a strict definition of what an insurrection is. But again, the 14th Amendment doesn't require a strict definition of insurrection in order to disbar somebody from running from office. All it needs is for a court to engage in asking the question of whether or not somebody had engaged in an insurrection, and if they had and were a prior oath taker, then they were barred from taking any public office in the future. So yeah, again, if there's an alternate definition that wants to be explored for an insurrection, then I welcome that. But that definition, it needs to comport with the historical and legal understanding of what an insurrection was.
30
Otherwise,
seconds.
it's just meaningless, meandering, opining that means nothing, when we should be thinking, like, what was the definition of insurrection at the time the 14th Amendment was drafted?
Okay, that's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. You don't want to use the rest of the 20 seconds, Destiny? Okay.
I mean, like, we can, if
10
this
seconds.
ends up going into like a whole bunch of like BLM stuff, I mean, we can get to that, but that has no bearing on whether J6 would be considered an insurrection or not. So
Okay, so 2 minutes and 57 seconds. That completes round one.
All right, man. Man, this guy could talk man. I was literally like, that Adderall has rotted his damn brain, man. Seriously, like. But speaking of BLM, guys, I was just looking at, apparently the U.S. basketball team, BLM strikes again, man. So the U.S. basketball team kneels with the BLM T-shirts here, and they're over in I believe it's Dubai or somewhere where they're hosting the Olympics. And these dudes are just, and this is just definitely organized for the event. This is who was chosen as the U.S. flag bearer for the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Anyone who has ever knelt for the national anthem should be disqualified from this honor. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Andrew was saying. Like, if you want to sit here and say that, you know, the January 6th situation was an insurrection, then we should, you should at least make it equal and call out BLM and the actions that they took after the situation that happened with George Floyd, that was damn near the same shit. Just keep it all the way real. You know? So if you want to define it like that, that could be defined as an insurrection as well. But yeah, W. Andrew Wilson. I mean, he destroyed his entire, that dude was talking for 20 minutes straight, and he just destroyed every single talking point within 3 to 4 minutes, man. He was doing the Destiny babble.